I think there's something in mine. Now I'm going to be thinking about it the whole time. I thought there was a subliminal message to me. Uh,
Hey,
Dude, did you whiten your teeth before the show too? My God, they
no.
look perfect, man.
Mitchell actually said something about that last week.
I'll be damned. You made your beard darker then because your teeth are whiter. I mean, it's just
Well,
everything about your studio looks better. I think, you've got the backdrop now. You've got everything
it's
looks
all
like,
because of this
yeah,
right here.
it's like you're
See?
you're like I'm all about business, but yet I still want to party right now. So we're gonna call this the License to Ill Show, 1986 Beastie Boys. Uh, so uh, Charles and I, welcome to the show Tuesday or Monday, actually, 12 o'clock Central Time. What are we calling this one? I forgot. Nick was telling me before the show we have a name for it, and I've got to figure it out. But I think it's called the Cut Above. Does that make sense? Cutting edge. Nick, thank you very much. So we're live in the studio today, Charles and I, and wanted to say I'm live from Chicago. Charles is live from Bishopville. Is that correct, Charles?
Yes, that is correct.
Any questions you have, come on over. And the purpose of this show is to talk a little bit about the Southeast, the market, interesting information going on. And Charles and I, before the show, chatted a little bit about some things to go. Let's just follow up last week. Last week was a little crazy. Lots of stuff going on the pine market, Charles. It seems like you couldn't find any 4-inch number 2 out there. Number 3 was tight. It's interesting. A guy was telling me up in the north, in the Midwest, he was buying. Here's how discombobulated markets are. The spruce market is going up, so low grade and spruce, where he usually buys number 3 carloads into the Midwest. He's buying number 1 2x6 Southern Pine because his call rate is 0, and his call rate on his industrial side on the spruce is about 20%. And he goes, it's not always like that. It's very seldom it is, but right now it's there. Can you explain to me what he was talking about? Like, does that make sense? Why he's doing that?
I mean, it makes perfect sense. I mean, he's price sensitive. And if you have an opportunity to buy a number one grade mark Southern Yellow Pine versus a utility or an industrial grade spruce, I mean, it kind of makes it a no brainer. If anybody's bought any number 2 spruce over, in the past 45 to 60 days, and you compare it to a number 1 as far as wane and coal rates, it doesn't compare. I mean, I think that's a pretty easy comparison. And the arbitrage opportunity and cost savings is astronomical, I'd imagine,
Yeah,
especially
well,
with getting 0% coal rate.
that's what he was saying. So he's saying, look, just add it 20%. He goes, I have no call rate on this number 1 that I get in here on this 2x6 pine. He goes, I got a 20%. He goes, you can do the math. It doesn't happen all the time, but it kind of shows the disconnect right now. And what like the things that you have to look at every day across species to figure out what the best yield is. It's crazy. So are you looking at some of that stuff with what you're doing right now? Is there any,
I mean,
any
you have to. I mean, the only thing that's really running neck and neck between the two species is Southern Yellow Pine 4-inch and Spruce 4-inch. I mean, those two species products are mirroring each other. 2x6, as far as construction goes or industrial applications, has presented a huge opportunity for cost savings. And anybody that isn't conscious of that, hopefully their salesperson or trader or whoever it is that they buy from is trying to educate them on it.
yeah, and you were talking about it on nines the other day on just on two and better, but I always forget sometimes how this is going across all the grades in pine, right?
Yep.
And look at, there used to always be this thing where guys up in the Midwest would say, well, I'm not going to switch over to pine unless it really is a cost savings. So everybody does something when they can save money, right?
Well,
Now
especially the dollars they can save today.
it's unbelievable right now. So this pine is moving all the way from the Southeast all the way up in the Midwest. And it makes sense. So let's talk a little bit too about the panel market. And that'll segue into consolidation a little bit. So the panel market is one thing that's kind of been, I wouldn't say weak. It's just been kind of stable, right? Does that make sense? Is that a good
OSB specifically, not plywood.
OSB specifically? Yeah,
Yes.
stable. You know, Southeast, some of these mills are building an order file, but would it be safe to say They're not building. It's not. They're building an order file before the price is going up. The price isn't moving as fast yet. Is that right, or am I
That's a
off on
fair
that?
No, I mean, you're exactly right. I think they're just locking in pricing because, I mean, even at 400 and mid $400 OSB in, the mid Atlantic or the Southeast, printing money, man.
Yeah. No doubt about that. No doubt about that. Probably the lowest cost production. Although I did see that log prices are finally starting to make a move back up in the South, which they hadn't in a while. So what,
They're up 15 to 20%, depending on
which
where they're
is
at. Because you got a lot of paper mills that are paying premiums for saw logs because you can't get any pulpwood.
so basically they're turning wood that you take and turn into 2x12 into toilet paper and paper.
Yep.
Yeah, which makes
They want to make
perfect.
sure everybody doesn't run out.
Well, no, but it's funny because remember 6 months ago that Wall Street Journal. Yeah, exactly. I went to Home Depot this week and bought that great big like 50 pack. I had to put of the extra soft. I had to put in the back of my Ridgeline to bring
Extra
home.
soft. Yeah.
Yeah.
You look like an extra soft guy.
Well, you got to be. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I actually bought the big old pack of that and the big old pack of Bounty. That literally I had to carry it out in a shopping cart. It was so big. So
Oh, yeah.
I'm one of those people that's responsible for the hoarding. But 6 months ago in the Wall Street Journal, they were talking about how log prices were kind of stagnant and even inflation adjusted hadn't moved in 25, 30 years. Well, they're starting to make a move now, it seems like.
Oh, they definitely are. But I mean, it also depends on the region. And that specific article that you're talking about was Southwest Georgia.
That's correct.
And what's interesting about that specifically is that's the region that got hammered by a hurricane 24 months ago, and stumpage was decimated. So that is going to create another intricacy that I don't think a lot of people are going to publicize, because that same guy that was getting, to a landowner $17 to $22 a ton is going to get an inflated price, because you've got a plywood mill, a couple of OSB mills, and some lumber mills that are in that panhandle region of Florida that depend heavily on that south central and southwest corner of Georgia for raw material.
That's a great point. So that article, when it was talking about that, it made it sound like it was everywhere, but it was only in a certain area that it was really concentrating on. Does that sound right?
No, I mean, I think log prices were the reason why it became news is very simply this: you had a lumber market that was running $150 a thousand every 10 days,
Yeah.
right? And sawmills were printing money and putting guys on allocation because it was dry and everybody was cutting wood. Well, now supply and demand, it's the same thing. And now there's a scenario where you have log decks that are empty, or they have 10 days worth of wood on it, and prices have to go up, or
Sure.
they don't get the wood. I mean, I know guys that own 500 to 2,000 acres that are just saying, I don't want to cut it. I'm not cutting it.
And if you own that, sometimes you don't have to. If you're a REIT, you probably want to cut it. You got to keep stuff moving, right?
Well, it depends on how you're structured. I mean, that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah, let's somebody just put up a message here. A LinkedIn user said, "Will OSB follow the lumber spike?"
I think you've got some variables that go into it. Obviously, I mean, you have more studs that go into a sheet of OSB than vice versa, right? So that has a lot to do with why you see the big spike in lumber, number one. But number two, you also, both operations are very automated, but as far as a sheet of OSB goes, it's easier to create 2 4x8s than it is 4 2x4s. So the labor thing is going to come into play too. And I read an interesting article about that last week I think Forbes or Bloomberg or somebody put it out. There's like 4.2 million or 5.2 million employees or available labor pool that are just not showing up for work. And I mean, that creates a heck of a scenario, especially when you combine it with every other variable that's going on. Bathtub shortages, truck shortages, truss plate shortages. It just makes everything extremely difficult.
No doubt. Well, you and I were talking a little bit about. Do you think there's still a chunk of inventory that got bought on this last go around that's sitting out there? Because I think a lot of people. I had this conversation with a guy today. Got a truck in, and some of it had old units on it, right, from like 6 months ago, and of lumber. And he's like, "How can that be possible and this last move we had, I'm like, hey, look at it. It's possible because people bought a lot of lumber and panels in this last move up, more than they normally buy. That's why prices go up. Are there still people sitting on a bunch of OSB they bought 6 months, 5 months ago, 4 months ago?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they've had the opportunity to average it down with contracts, but there's still, low $20 sheets of plywood sitting out there. I mean,
Yeah,
some of the relationships that we have as a company has given us some insight to that, which obviously has given us a little bit of a competitive edge on that side of the business. But it it's it's real intriguing because once again, and I think I've said this before, you can only average your inventory costs down so far until you have wood coming out of your ears and mills yelling at you coming to pick it up and
yep,
ports screaming and trucks and everything else. So there's kind of an equilibrium that's established, whether you're a retail yard and you have several locations or you're a one location operation, to where you kind of enough's enough, right? And you either sell your contracts in open market or you try to sell out of inventory, and it doesn't move nearly as fast, or you lose $20,000 a truck. So it's real. The variables are hard to nail down, I guess, is what I'm really saying.
sure.
And the price of OSB, I do not think will follow the lumber spike. I think you'll see some upward momentum, but a lot of these mills are selling out, through the month of November, first part of December. And I mean, there's this very, very small premium to print. And if that's the case, they're seeing something to where they just want the volume spoken for, and they don't have to worry about anything in Q4.
Yeah, exactly. And there's an old thing always in our industry that order file leads price. So again, like Charles and I may have a different opinion. We don't know. We're just purely guessing on that. We'll see what next week brings. But one of the interesting things, you and I talked and touched about freight last week, and just an update. I was talking to a buddy over the weekend. He had a great point. He's like, there are new incumbents in these reloads putting wood on the ground that never did before, for reasons because they don't want to rely on their old suppliers to run out of wood like they did last time. They're afraid of the market going to 1800. We can all talk about that. But one of the real things that was interesting, like a buddy of mine said, he just started a multifamily job in Charlotte. And he goes, I used to service that from 700 miles away, 600 miles away. I can't do that anymore. He goes, I have to have now, instead of 2 or 3 reloads along the East Coast, I'm looking at a map right now, I have to have like 7 or 8. They have to be so close to these jobs. Otherwise, I can't rely on trucks. I can't get trucks. He said one trucker that was doing 50 trucks a week for him is doing 50 for the last 2 years, is doing 15 maybe trucks a week for him, because the trucker doesn't have the labor. If something breaks down, he can't get stuff fixed. All the reasons you hear about, but you know, hopefully when I hear about it, these problems are starting to remedy themselves. But that's kind of the stuff I'm hearing. What are you hearing on that?
It's very similar, and I think you and I touched on it last week. That's it. You know, so if he had a reload in the Northeast and he was coming south, that freight rate that he would pay for that is now a Greenville, South Carolina to a Charlotte market rate.
Yeah,
So, I mean, it only makes sense that you diversify your asset base. And
absolutely.
by diversify your asset base, you park wood in different locations based on what the demand is. And I think I touched on it specifically last week as far as, a true total cost and what that looks like to somebody, because you've got, handling costs, you've got true raw material costs, and you got finished good costs. And with our specific strategic location close to major interstates that can service Atlanta, Charlotte, Charleston, all the way up the eastern seaboard and all the way down to Miami, it presents an opportunity where that calculation is very easy, and it's remedied snap of the finger.
Absolutely. I think just so people know, I mean, a lot of this is carload business. So when you're coming from Quebec or Ontario or Alberta or BC or even the Pacific Northwest, it's not a lot of different to rail a car in North Carolina versus South Carolina versus Georgia. When you're talking straight trucks out of mills on Southern Pine and all that, you just have to get mills closer to it, right? And do that. Otherwise, you got to pay extra freight. Maybe you could tell Charles how much is something coming out of the South to a specific location last year versus this year, or what? Give them what's an idea of a rate difference they're pretty substantial, right?
I mean, it's 40 to 60% depending. I mean, Central Florida back up to South Carolina is $1,200 to $1,300, whereas a year ago we were paying $700.
Yeah, and it's harder to get, obviously harder to get trucks.
Yeah, and I think to kind of complement what you said about carloads, The other side of it is that once a car shows up, you still have outbound freight unless the job site's next door to the reload. And I
Yep.
guess that's what I was keying on as far as strategic locations. Because if you've got to reload, right now the multifamily market in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Charlotte, North Carolina are huge. So if you have reloads that are close to those locations within 100 miles, your freight used to be $350 to $500 depending, and now it's $8. So that is the biggest piece and the biggest conundrum for most people. And setting up new reloads and the fact of who beats you there, how much volume do they have, how quick are they going to pull out? These are all things that you have to think about, because 9 times out of 10, before you find a reload or find the space, the car's already rolling with that address. So you kind of got to do your hand is forced.
Yeah, my guess is we're going to see inflation in the reloads too at some point, right? Where to use a reload, maybe we already are, because reloads, what they want people putting stuff in that are turning it all the time, right? They don't make their money off somebody putting it on the ground for 90 days. Matter of fact, that's a pain in the ass for them. And sometimes they incent and disincent for people not to do that. I mean, I talked to a couple reloads last week, and they said, "Hey, you can cross dock it here, but we don't want you to put it on the ground because we have too much sitting here right now." Basically, we can bring it in as long as it goes out right away, right? And
that creates another problem within itself.
Yeah,
because is the job site ready, or is your customer ready? Is anybody ready up further down the supply chain to take it?
Yeah, and the whole thing is we kind of rely on when job sites are ready, and they never go off when you think they're going to ever. That's so. What is IFP doing this week? What should we be looking at from you? What can people get to? What should they be doing with you this week?
Well, I mean, same old. I mean, we're trying to find opportunities to save people money and bring more value to the end user. It's 2x6 is the biggest opportunity to do so. Obviously, you've got wides that are tightening up due to a log shortage in Southern Yellow Pine. You also still have, I-joists that are difficult to find. So 2x12s are going to tighten up exponentially, I think, too, through the winter due to that. The other side of it is, as far as panels go, I mean, you've got major mills in the Southeast that, as I mentioned, are sold out through the first part of December. If you haven't bought, you're kind of showing up late to the show if it starts between now and then.
Yeah. So
you're dependent on contracts or vendors with contracts, which is a great scenario and a great partnership. But if there's any overruns, you're kind of stuck at whatever the market.
What is the deal of the day on materials exchange from IFP today on 2x6, 104 and 5/8?
2x6, 104 and 5/8 is probably right around 635, 640 in Bishopville, which if you compare it to open market 2x6, 104 and 5/8 in Spruce, roughly $180 to $200 1,000 savings.
Yeah, that's
on an FOB basis. If you look at it from a delivery basis, it could be better than that.
Well, I appreciate it, Charles. I'll let you I know when we talked today, you were slamming it out on the floor and doing all kinds of stuff. So I'll let you get back to it. If you want to get a hold of Charles, we'll throw his email up here in a second. I'll have Nick throw it up in the corner, but also come to mxlumber.com. That's mxlumber.com, and we'll get you on being able to buy and sell. There's Charles' email down in the bottom left corner. Make sure you send him a note if you have something, and we'll look forward to doing this again next Monday, Charles.
Sounds good, Ash. Thanks for the time.
Yep, bye.
All right, bye.